next I want to build on what I had just said about pursuing these qualities and really weaving them into our nature, and what it means to do that, and how you can understand something qualitatively without it being part of a picture, without it being something held only in our sense of self or in our conscious mind. And I want to compare that to what we think about God and what it means for God to be the embodiment of all of the best qualities versus what it might mean to truly understand that without a comprehensive picture in our conscious mind. And I want to examine this idea of what God is. Most people would agree that God is omnipotent and omniscient and omnibenevolent, or fully and completely good. So we might ask ourselves, what does that mean? What is that for God? And I think we could agree that God has to be every good quality, every quality worth having, the perfect expression and manifestation of every good quality must be seen in God. God represents the complete fulfillment of every good quality and characteristic that we could aspire to. And when we do it, it's only sort of a shadow or an imperfect representation of that thing. Now, when we think of that, we think God must be something of extremes. God must occupy the polar extreme of every conceivable good quality, the absolute limits and beyond of what we can understand. Now, obviously, one form of extremes would be good or evil, but if we believe that evil is just a lack of good, a deprivation, something that hasn't been fully developed yet, then we can easily see how God is just the polar extreme of goodness, because that is completeness and perfection, whereas evil just means something hasn't been fully developed yet. It is a less perfect representation, and so God does not occupy sort of the lower depths of evil. But then we're left with trying to understand, what are God's qualities like? What is God's character? How can we paint a picture of that? And if we paint our picture of God as someone completely good, as someone embracing every good quality, then it's not that hard to understand. God has perfect love and perfect justice and perfect power and perfect truth all at the same time. And that's pretty simple, but that's a lot of qualities. So you might think about what that means. And on some qualities, we come to a question of whether God is ultimate simplicity or ultimate complexity. And that's a little bit harder to answer, because if God is simple, then things that mirror God's nature must be simple. Complexity cannot reflect God's design. It's against God's design. And that's not true. And yet, God isn't just complex either, because love and truth and God and reality can be very, very simple and elegant. These things don't reflect something which is against God's nature either. And so we're left with sort of a paradox. God represents the best qualities, the perfect expression of something elegantly simple, but completely complex at the same time, which might make it seem like something paradoxical within God's nature, but that's not true if God is great enough to encompass both things. We're left wondering, is God contradictory? Does God just have a confused and paradoxical nature? And I think the answer is no. God encompasses that full paradox within his nature and is not limited by one. He's just big enough to encompass them all. Now, if we transfer this over to this idea of good qualities, we conceive of God as supremely good, supremely loving, someone who can provide the fulfillment and peace and reconciliation for the worst things we've ever experienced, pure healing and pure gentleness, and the pure realm of rest and peace that we might be searching for all our lives from any negative experiences we've had. So I'm going to put that right here. We're going to think of the complete fulfillment of all healing and gentleness. And I'm going to put an H for healing right here. And all attempts we have to deal with the stresses and the traumas and the wounds of life, we can finally find that rest and that perfection and that fulfillment we've been seeking in God. At the same time, God is the perfect embodiment and expression and manifestation of everything that encourages us to be something better, the energy that drives life, and the call to be greater and to fight for what's right, and to not just be bound by where we were yesterday, but to be something better. Every form of excitement and adventure and call to something greater, well, that's good too. And so we're left with nothing but the conclusion that God must also represent this very active and vitalizing principle as well, a form of love which captivates us and stirs us to do extraordinary things and pulls us and excites us and inspires us. And I don't think we can really say that God is just this sort of pure and complete comfort and hope and rest and peace. It's also correct to say that God represents this very vitalizing essence, sort of the dawn and the breaking out of the light and the active energy which drives the universe and calls us to be the best we can possibly be. And that is also a fulfillment of a complete quality, which I'm going to put right here, the absolute completion of this other good quality, which I'm going to say E for energy. Now, God is still the perfection of every good thing, the perfect fulfillment of every good quality we can possibly think about. But we see these two qualities, which are entirely contradictory to one another. This is this sort of motivating, activating concept of goodness, the energizing, the excitement, and the thing that calls us and stirs our hearts. And here we have God as sort of an infinite peace and a chance to finally rest. Now, if God has one character, how can God be both of those things? It doesn't make sense. We might call this a paradox, but if God is infinite, then God has the power. The pen isn't working. Okay, the pen is working insufficiently. But point is that this is a spectrum. These are two poles on one spectrum which God fully occupies and encompasses. God is not limited to this aspect of it, and God is not limited to this concept right here. God represents the entire polar spectral distinction between these two things. And we can't say one fully represents God or one doesn't. They're both manifestations of a part of God's quality, which God can encompass in whole, and through his infinity can not be completely contained by either, but rather can see both as unique reflections of an infinite and thus very, very vast character, which will provide us with both in different contexts and depending on who we are and where we are at in life, basically. It might immediately seem counterintuitive that God could hold opposite qualities, but we can ask the question about the world. Is it correct to say that the world is hospitable for humans or not hospitable for humans? Is it a really hot place or a really cold place or a really temperate place? And you'd probably say yes to all of those. It's all of those. And someone who's never been to Earth might ask, how is that possible? That doesn't make sense. You can't be that. But the world is just a really, really big place. It actually makes perfect sense when you consider how huge the world is. It's big enough that it's both of those, and when you describe it as hot or dangerous or cold or wet or dry, you're only presenting a piece of the picture. It's actually so vast that it's all of those things, and if we limit it to one or say that it's inherently contradictory, we're not understanding the real vastness of the earth. It's all of those. It actually occupies all the space between those possibilities because it's so big, and it's not limited by the polarity. It occupies the entire spectrum between those two qualities. So for God, we can understand in his vastness, he must be both of those things. G.K. Chesterton actually talks about this as well. I can't sign in. Yay, I got it. Okay. G.K. Chesterton talks about this, about how Christianity has to him very odd values, because in his day and age he's seeing skeptics of Christianity. They say it makes people weak, it's watery, it's all this turn the other cheek stuff, it doesn't encourage the passions of life. That's awful. But then they also say it's violent, and the Crusades and all the torment it's caused, that's just awful. It's too violent and too gentle. It doesn't encourage us to, stand up and live life, but it also does it too much, and it should be gentler. It's too depressing, and it just sort of doesn't want you to have any fun, but it's also overly indulgent, and it's just got all of these self-contradicting qualities. And how can we make sense of that? Chesterton, he talks about this. He says, in trying to compare all of these criticisms and seeing how they could all apply to Christianity without himself being a Christian, he says, I simply deduce that Christianity must be something even weirder and wickeder than they made out. A thing might have these two opposite vices, but it must be a rather queer thing if it did. A man might be too fat in one place or too thin in another, but he would be an odd shape. Very true. Chesterton's response to this is that Christianity occupies just the middle, and everybody has these weird criticisms of it because it's right in the middle. But when it comes to something like this, about the earth, or maybe Christianity, not Christianity, but when it comes to God, my thought is not that it occupies just the middle and so seems different to everyone at different extremes of possibility, but rather that God is vast enough to encompass all of these things, and what we call the extremes of maybe life or passion or energy, and the extremes of peace and rest and gentleness and comfort for those who need it. These are only two expressions of one nature of God, extremes which God occupies, but which are only a part of his manifestation, when he is great enough to express all of them from different angles. So when we think about that, we say God is infinitely good and infinitely right. And God has these two expressions of who he is, sort of a dual manifestation. We also said simplicity and complexity a little bit earlier, so let's add that as well. Simplicity and complexity. Let's add this here for the epitome of all complexity and development, and this right here for the epitome of all simplicity and elegance and purity, which God also represents in his goodness. Similarly, we can see that God represents each of these, not in contradiction, but in a vastness which encompasses the polarity of each of those. God must encompass those and cannot be said to be limited by either. They're different expressions of his characterization, and they're different parts of his character are expressed. So that's 4. And let's think a little bit more about these right here, this idea of infinite healing and comfort versus infinite life and vitality. Well, when I think about this, I think about what it means for God to be that, and I see another distinction. I see sort of this very gentle, nurturing presence in God, this healing and this opportunity for comfort when those are suffering, and kind of in combination with that, I see God as just sort of still self-existent, the purity and unaltered truth as it is. When we think about the gentle and less aggressive maybe aspects of God, I think of God in this one sense of sort of the comfort and healing one might receive from one's mother, sort of a infinitely nurturing life that God has to offer to us. But then also, we could say that God is still and unmoving and unwavering truth. God is solid, which is really distinct from what we said over here about God being infinitely nurturing. That's another aspect. So I'm going to add this right here, this T for truth. So God is the uncompromising truth, which really doesn't care about our own opinions and just sort of stands solidly as the bulwark and foundation of reality, not really trying to do one thing or another, but merely acting as the substance and solidity underlying all reality and goodness. And we have here, which is not complete stillness and sort of an unwavering and uncompromising solidity, but really an active interest in nurturing and helping those who need it. All right, so that was one, and now that's two, coupled with our complexity and simplicity. And then let's think over here about this, the extremity of action and activity and the energy that God provides us in life. Well, I see multiple expressions of that too. We can say God is sort of very encouraging and inspiring and exciting, and like a child at play who he gives us the opportunity to play and he wants to play with us, and it's this very innocent and pure thing. But then also God can be rousing. He can call us to war. He will not allow anything to harm those he loves or what he thinks matters, and he calls us to do the same. So I'm going to put another distinction between this extremity right here for war right here. And once again, we have this idea that God is sort of the extreme of life and what gives life. But there are multiple expressions of that too. We can't say God is just one thing. He is sort of this zealous and adventurous and inspiring vitality, but he is also the uncompromising force and intensity of a call to a righteous cause and fighting the good fight and not being willing to back down and bravery and standing against evil. And that's God too, but those are different things as well. Those we can't say are just one quality of God's expression. There are so many. We can't limit it to just one expression. So now we have this idea of God is infinite, the infinite expression of every good quality. And he has two expressions of himself, two sides of God's character, two dual manifestations of what it means to be fully good and fully perfect. And with this simplicity and complexity right here, this two actually becomes four. And when we think of the different ways one can be vitalizing and call us to life, or still and slow and call us to stillness and serenity, we have two manifestations here, creating sort of six qualities that God represents and can fully encompass. And we can keep going and keep going and keep going to think of what it means to actually be good, to be the pinnacle of goodness, to be the supreme expression and fulfillment of every good quality. And once we find one, we see that one principle which we found expressed branches out into more and more and more specific expressions of what that means. They have so many dual manifestations that we couldn't encompass in that first expression. And the more we create, I'm just going to part T, we see that what was 2 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 6, and 6 becomes 8, and on and on and on. And as we keep understanding this duality of God, we get to sort of a quadrality of God, and then an octality of God. And progressively, each different expression of God's character becomes a more fine shade of that we hadn't understood before, that can't be fully expressed. And when we completely map everything out, if God is infinite in all of these things, then we find that there is not one limit of what God can be. There is not multiple sides of God's expression, but it is rather one fluid, complete, and continuous stream of excellence encompassing everything all at once. We have God encouraging us and sort of adding energy to our lives. We have God offering us a chance to rest, and along this we have serenity and stillness and encouragement and peace and gentleness and firmness and stoicism and sternness, all different expressions of what it means to be good, and the fulfillment of these qualities we see in God's character. So we can't say it's 2 or 4 or 6 or any number, because the more we explore, the more points we find on this circle of expression, basically. And they get closer and closer and closer, and the more we add, the more accurate we can say it is. But if God is infinite, the expression of every goodness, we see that God encircles and encompasses all of them. This is why talking about God being one is kind of misleading, because when we think of God as one, we think of God as sort of an option among many. There's God's way, and there's the world's way, or the sinful way, or our way. There's God's qualities and not God's qualities. There's the realm of God things, God's camp of goodness, and then there's the other things over off on the side, which inherently means that God is one out of many of a list of options. God occupies his place in the world, but that's only one place among many. God doesn't encompass the group, he's just part of the group of possibilities, the group of things we could make our goals in life. And that's false, because when we think of that, God inherently must be less than those things. God doesn't encompass all of that. We think of God in this sort of specific category of the good things in life, the truth, which is only one of a collection in the vastness of the universe. But this is mistaken because, like we said before, evil is a deprivation of good that hasn't fully developed yet. And when we understand God, we see God as the completion and fulfillment and health of every good option and every possibility. God doesn't actually occupy one out of many different camps of belief or devotion or true living. God is not one in a set of options, which is the correct option. God encompasses the extremity of everything good. If we were going to put everything else, it wouldn't even be on this circle. It would be somewhere sort of within and limited that can't really encompass the entirety of the good. And so when we think of God as one among many, we're kind of doing it a disservice. It's like saying that, well, there's the sky, there's the universe, and then there's everything on earth. And that's a lot of things. So many things are not the sky. So many things are not a part of the sky or the universe or what's outside the earth. But that's really misleading, because all of the things on earth are just so much less than the vastness of the sky. And when we think about the majority of all that there is, the extremity, the encompassing totality of what it means to be something, what it means to sort of encompass everything around the earth, it's just so much bigger than anything we can see on our current planet. The sky is much bigger than the earth, and the universe is much bigger than the earth. And when we really think about it, it's really not earth and universe. It's the universe is the vast majority of things that encompasses so much else, and really encompasses the earth too when we think about it. We should not think of it as one among many, or God is this way or that way. God is the completion, the fulfillment of every good way. And we can't really put him on a list, and we can't really confine him to one particular set of qualities or characteristics. This is to fail to understand God's vastness and his complete manifestation. Now, because of this is why when we paint a picture of God, that's not a good idea. That inherently makes God, in a way, incomplete. Once we make a picture of God, we sort of come up with this idea of God is these things. We make that picture uncompromising truth. When we decide that we have nothing more to learn about that picture, then we have limited God. We've made God one among many in a way, and there's a very good chance that we've cut God off from part of the possibilities of what it means to be himself. So we could sort of section off part of this right here and say, well, this is God. God is the one who encourages us and who has a wonderful way for us to live and who will never let us be bored. And that's how we understand God. Or we could say over here, God is just this very still and stoic and just sort of uncompromising truth, never wavering and just always showing us the awe of his grandeur. And that's really what God is like. Or any number of other things, simple, complex, terrifying, any number of things. And we can pick that picture, and that picture is probably accurate to some extent, but that picture must exclude so much else of the possibility about what it means to be God. And when we select that, we make an image in our mind of what God is, and we decide that that picture is complete, then we're cutting ourselves off from some of the possibility of learning about God. And there's a very, very good chance that we've only taken just a very, very small section. Now, how do we know about God at all if we're not supposed to make a picture of God, right? How are we supposed to be like what God says if, once we create a picture of God's totality, that picture is inherently flawed and doesn't contain all the possibilities of what God's character is like? Well, here we go back again to qualitative understanding. The thing that I would really want to enforce here is that we shouldn't be making a picture of God and then trying to match ourselves to that picture. We find an extremity, the expression of a good quality which God calls us to live with. Maybe God has given us a very caring spirit, we're very nurturing, and we want to help people, and this is really what we're drawn to, and these are the talents God's given us. Or maybe God's encouraged us to be artists or to be scientists and to search for the truth, and not really interact with people so much as just kind of really uncover more of what there is to discover. Or maybe God's just given us a very stoic nature, but God has given us skills in some capacity, an expression of good which is worth pursuing. And to really know and follow God, to let that goodness come into our lives, means to find the expression of goodness God has made us suited to develop these qualities, and to really fully devote ourselves to them, to passionately pursue them. So if God has called us to really sort of pursue truth and stand unwavering against the night, then we take this section here and we just absolutely devote ourselves to it. We pursue perfection and complete fulfillment of this quality in such a way that it subsumes us and becomes a part of our being. Or if God has called us to really care for others and help people who need it and bind up the wounds, then we are going to focus on this and just absolutely pursue it to the greatest extent we possibly can, to find the complete fulfillment and manifestation of perfection in healing and looking after others. Or any other thing. If God has called us to sort of a great cause, then we pursue that constantly and relentlessly, and really pursue excellence in what it means to not give in to evil and to keep pursuing what God has for us, and really continue to fight for what's worth fighting for. Now, once we decide that these things are true and that this is just a fact of what God is like and that's why we're doing it, now we've cut this off, and now we can appreciate the talents that this person has, or the expression of God's qualities from this person right here, or anything else. Once it's a picture of what's true, then that's not what we should do, and that's bad, and we've cut ourselves off from the completion of the picture. But the point is not that it's the totality of God, it's the totality of what God offers to us. God gave us this opportunity and gave us these talents, and we are going to pursue them because this is our experience of God. This is where we taste God, and this is what we're going to pursue. So in this way, God is not giving us a picture, but he's giving us an opportunity to find excellence. And other people probably have a different form of excellence, a different way of living and different qualities, which means God is going to be reflected in their growth in different ways. And that's very good. But the difference is qualitative understanding. It's not, this is my picture of God and this is what I believe is true and so this is how we should live, but rather it becomes this qualitative, intimate, direct experience of a tiny, infinitesimally small piece of God and what God's nature is. And you can't say that's complete. You can't say that you understand God in anything close to a big picture, total capacity. You don't understand that. But you have tasted this one small part of God, this experience, and you are absolutely going to devote yourself to that and allow the intimacy and the experience and the nature of God. You're going to allow this life to illuminate every part of how you live and the way that you pursue excellence in the world. It becomes how we live. It becomes the light that illuminates our lives, and we have that qualitative understanding. We're stepping into the light and letting it illuminate every part of our vision. Again, qualitative versus intellectual understanding. It's not our narrative, it's not our picture of God, and we don't pretend it's complete. But in doing so, we sort of lose a sense of even trying to rationally grasp God. We lose a sense of even trying to make it into a picture, it becomes second nature. It becomes part of the dance of how we're living our lives, and it becomes ingrained into our value space, how we're living and what we're devoting ourselves to. We hold on to that quality. We pursue the good qualitatively and intimately.